Howdy, I'm Kate Kavanaugh, and you're listening to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, where we're laying the groundwork for our land, ourselves, and for generations to come by looking at the way every thread of life is connected to one another. Communities above ground mirror the communities below the soil, which mirror the vast community of the cosmos. As the saying goes, as above, so below. Join me as we take a curious journey into agriculture, biology, history, spirituality, health, and so much more. I can't wait to unearth all of these incredible topics alongside you. Hello, and welcome to the Groundwork Podcast, formerly the Mind, Body, and Soil Podcast. I know that we have been in the process of changing this name forever, but I have a real fire under my tuchus these days because I just don't think the current title really underlines what we are exploring. I am your host, Kate Kavanaugh. Did I mention that? And it is such a pleasure to be here exploring the threads of what it means to be humans woven into this earth. And this is an exceptionally human episode. It is all about what it means to live in a meat suit that leaks. And it is something that is very beautiful. I was thinking today after I recorded this episode that we've had a couple of explorations of what I would call effluvia, or just the various liquids that come out of our human bodies. And today really punctuates that. My guest today is Cutter Wood with his book, Earthly Materials, Journeys Through Our Body's Emissions, Excretions, and Disintegrations. And I'll tell you what, I was actually recommended Cutter's book and instantly was delighted. But what I found inside was nothing like what I had expected. The prose in this book is absolutely stunning. Each chapter, as he moves through mucus, urine, blood, semen, menses, milk, flatulence, breath, feces, vomit, hair, and tears, and ultimately sound, has a very different structure. And you'll hear him say in this interview, which I thought was really interesting, that he structured each one. I mean, what would breath feel like? What would a chapter in vomit feel like? And structurally, they're quite different, but all very beautiful. And a lot of this ultimately comes down to human connection and what it means to be human. Cutter says at the beginning of the book, I sometimes wonder if this prudishness about our bodily materials stems in part from an intuition that the stories they tell might diverge from those we would prefer to believe. It's far easier philosophically and far safer emotionally if we consider these materials mere byproducts of the real work of being human. And what you'll hear over the course of this episode is that a great deal of this is, and I know this will surprise you long listeners of the podcast, a great deal of this is actually about death. And it's about caring for one another in these transient and very human bodies. And with that, and to invite you into some of Cutter's prose, I want to read a passage, if only because reading out loud really is my love language. And this is just so, so beautifully done. Assuming half a liter a day by volume and a lifetime in the vicinity of 75 years, you'll leave behind about 14,000 liters of feces when you die. The sum of your urine will be closer to 33,000 liters, almost exactly the size of a standard shipping container and only slightly less than the accumulated volume of your flatulence. You'll have made about 6,000 liters of tears, though even for the most emotive of individuals, the portion derived from feelings will make up a minuscule fraction of that number. You might have produced a few thousand liters of milk, meanwhile, depending on your approach to breed production, and you might have donated 150 liters of blood, depending on your feelings about needles and markets. For all the hullabaloo surrounding ejaculation, the total semen production of even the most alacritous masturbator could be contained handily in a few 2-liter soda bottles. And though a period sometimes seems as though it will never end, you could not paint a closet with the 2 or 3 liters of menses produced during your lifetime. You'll have made a great deal of mucus, though, close to 100,000 liters, and an amount of breath, about 300 million liters, that cannot easily be conceptualized. When Atropos snips the thread of your life, your head hair, measured as a single strand, will stretch close to 2 million feet. Cutter goes on to say, your 300 million liters of collective breath, though seemingly a staggering volume, represents such a puny fragment of the atmosphere that you'd need to chase the number deep into a field of decimals to distinguish it from zero. This is what you will leave behind. Not much. I can't get over that piece where he talks about chasing the number into a field of decimals to distinguish it from zero. And ultimately, this really is about our mortality and what we might leave behind, which Cutter and I do explore over the course of this episode. This book was an absolute delight. It surprised me. It intrigued me. I learned so much. I have a newfound respect for all effluvia, but mucus in particular was the surprise and incredibly versatile and unknown and rapidly being studied material in this that really caught me off guard. And the chapter on breath, as you'll hear me talk about, is just really, really beautiful. And Cutter's vision for this to illustrate our connectedness through our effluvia, as it were, is something worth singing the praises of, because I think that really this is about care for one another and about seeking connection in places that are hard to seek it. And while it might feel difficult to imagine how this book about all of these different leaky bits of our very human bodies is about connection, then I highly recommend picking it up. I know that it will not disappoint you in the least. And so with that, I want to get to Cutter, and I first want to say how much I appreciate your listenership. I know that I've said this before, but this podcast really is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get, and this week is no different. And your support in exploring these threads that are very connected thematically as we talk about things around death and care and various components of the ecosystems that we are deeply entangled within, that there are some deep threads. And I'm working to explore that more on both my Patreon and my Substack, where you can support this podcast if you so choose. Right now, there are no benefits, but benefits are coming. And if you want to support the podcast for free, the best way to do that is to leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts, or perhaps share the episode that you enjoy with a friend and dig into more episodes. You'll find at the bottom of each episode, as we creep into having 120 episodes of this podcast, which boggles my mind, that there are a list of related episodes under each of these new gems. And wow, do we have some gems coming up. I don't even know how to tell y'all how exciting some of these upcoming episodes are. And with that, let me not delay. Here is Cutter Wood, whose book, Earthly Materials, Journeys Through Our Body's Emissions, Excretions, and Disintegrations, is out now. The audiobook is also fantastic, and I can't wait to hear what you think of this conversation. Okay. Yeah. Well, Cutter, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this book. I'm obsessed.
It's a unique one, right?
It's stunning. I mean, it's really beautiful.
Thank you.
And something I'm quite passionate about too. I'm glad that Sharon put it on my radar. I'm very a fan of Effluvia, as it were. So
I think more people should be, personally.
I've worked as a farmer for most of my career and in agriculture in general, and have been very exposed to all manner of effluvia and its many and its many benefits. It's many parts of the reciprocity of the cycles of ecology.
Yeah. I worked on a dairy farm one time. And like you attach
I
the
caught that
suckers
in
to
the
the
book.
what's that?
I caught that in the book.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I don't think I mentioned this in the book, but I remember, you have to make sure you don't get a sucker on a teat with mastitis and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
But also all these cows, especially if you're not like somebody they're used to, they're all just crapping all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't drink milk for like 2 years after that. It was just so disturbing to see the reality.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely the splash zone, I think, is what I refer to it as in milking cows, especially when it's just you and a pail.
Oh my goodness, I can't imagine
that creates a whole different space. Though I have goats and I milk my goats mostly, and that's a little bit tidier, and there's something to be said for that exchange of leaning your head against an animal's flank and milking it, and I don't know,
it does seem
some
very
strange
sweet that way.
connection. It is, yeah, but not how it works in the industrial model by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
Yeah. Okay, just so I know, do you have a hard out? I want to make sure I respect your time.
Nope. I'm totally flex here.
Great. Couple of notes. I mean, anything can be paused. You can go back. This all gets edited in post. So that also means there's no being glued to your chair. If you need more coffee, if you need to get up and use the bathroom, please feel comfortable. That's my main goal of this, is for you to feel comfortable.
Excellent. I appreciate the way you're doing this, by the way. It seems very conducive to actual conversation.
Ooh, that's what I like to have. That's the goal, is always to have an actual conversation. And with that, I'll give you my last note, which is I have just absolutely gobs of notes and quotes over here. And I do look to this side of my screen and read, and I like for people to know what I'm doing.
Cool.
That I'm looking at all these notes I have, and I imagine there will be some reading you back to you, because the prose is just not to be understated.
Okay, well, I'm glad this is audio then, so you can't see me blushing.
Sometimes it's nice. Some people like it, other people don't. But it's certainly nice for me, because I sat this morning and was reading out loud to my husband, and just sort of marveling. Nice. And I think that in general, and we'll just kind of drop in, is just marveling at effluvia, which I've had much cause to do, and I'm grateful for, but I think I have even more cause to marvel and wonder and be curious about it now.
It's so peculiar, right? And it goes in so many different directions.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting in that. I think it's very peculiar to us in that we don't want to see it, and it's very hidden from us. And I think that you open this in such a beautiful way by talking about the mess being the goal. That there is this sort of tidy story that we tell about the human body that leaves out this matter, this effluent that is very much what it means to be human and what it means to be humans together.
Yeah. This is the biggest thing to me, like we're always, if somebody's crying at the movie theater, they're trying to wipe it away before anybody else can see. And there's a big thing, for instance, in Japan, where there are actually buttons that you can press that make a sound like a toilet flushing, so that people can't hear you using the restroom when you go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
People are always in such a rush to pretend none of this is happening. And I worry just because it is one of the few things that really ties every single person together.
Yes. It's an equalizer, I think, in that sense. I think it ties us and ties us to one another, ties us to a sense of just, again, what it is to be human, and is the reality of our our bodies, which I actually think is increasingly important in a more and more disembodied world.
Yes. Yeah. It's one of the strange parts about it that, yeah, we're getting to a point where we could have like almost no physical interactions if we so chose, right?
Yeah.
And many do. And yeah, I definitely feel that would be a huge loss, and one that we wouldn't even really be able to wrap our minds around because we're ignoring so much of what the reality of our bodies is.
Yeah. I wonder too, and I want to ask this at the front, I think that you there's a lot about death, and I want to talk more about death in this conversation, but that there is something about the shedding, the constant shedding of our bodies that takes us closer into our own mortality in a way that we might not want to touch or hold.
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's terrifying, right?
Yeah.
It's weird and it's often painful. You know, I have two children who are both now, fingers crossed, out of potty training.
A lot of effluvia there.
Yeah, big inspiration.
Yeah.
And yeah, just this whole process is so weird and tortured and strange. A kid, it's very common for children to decide they're just not going to do it, right? Why would I do that? Just don't have to. Because it's scary and it's uncomfortable, and then suddenly there's this thing which used to be you and now isn't anymore. I see it most in, I think hair is kind of the fascinating one there when you're talking about the relationship of these effluvia to death, which death obviously an obsession of mine.
Me too. You and me both. And this podcast.
But with hair, it's one of those things that just lasts and lasts and lasts, and so it's always been so intimately tied with death. I think that one is very fascinating what people end up doing with hair.
Yeah, I was hypnotized reading about that. I hadn't even considered it, that it is this thing that lasts, that is collectible, which is something else I want to kind of tug at, but that hair, I hadn't really thought about it. I hadn't really thought of hair actually as, I think because it's a solid in some ways more than a liquid, like the rest of our body's secretions. That it didn't strike me as the same, but it's something that we cling to, right? We try to keep.
Big time. I mean, I don't know if you've seen these, but the old memento mori that Victorians would make, where they'd take a dead person's hair and just weave these miniature, kind of like brooch-sized, elaborate landscapes out of hair. Weeping willows of hair cascading down over a meadow. Just so peculiar. And then you have all these kind of like specific examples of the weirdness that, when Edgar Allan Poe dies here in Baltimore, all the upstanding citizens of the city come down and snip off a little locket of his hair. Just strange. Or that we still have what are supposedly locks of the founding fathers' hair down at the Smithsonian Museum. What a weird thing to possess.
So peculiar.
And it's amazing to me, nobody's made any efforts to DNA sequence them or anything to see. They're probably just
interesting.
cut off who knows what. Maybe not even humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, we're strangely obsessed with it. And you get that feeling that even though it's this very kind of sterile material and something long since detached from a person, it does feel so intimate.
Hello. If you are enjoying this podcast episode with Cutter Wood and his new book, Earthly Materials, Journeys Through Our Body's Emissions, Excretions, and Disintegrations, then can I ask a favor of you? Will you just hit that little subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get some of the next very exciting episodes? And if you so wish, you could leave a rating and review, or perhaps share this episode that you are no doubt enjoying with a friend, where the sounds of this conversation can live on past the transience of our body's effluvia. And you'll hear at the very end of this episode, Cutter and I talk about how it's conversations like this and connection points like this and words like the ones that Cutter has written in this book that might transcend our mortal meat suits. And so with that, your support of the podcast through your earballs, these sounds coming into them means the world to me. There are also ways to support me through Patreon and Substack, though there are not currently benefits to this. The benefit is helping me to continue to do this work, and benefits are coming soon, including a 200 long book list and many other things. So hop on in there to that Patreon and Substack, and all of those goodies will be coming to you soon. Thank you. Let's get back to this interview with Cutter, why don't we? Yeah, I mean, I think in a body full of transient materials, anything that lasts becomes the thing we want to cling to, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share my own weird anecdote, which is this is all going to sound so weird, but that's fine. There's this.
That's the nature of this book.
Yeah, I have this chair, and it has a sort of furniture button that's come up. It's an old chair, and I'd put this tiny little bit of cat hair from my cat that died a couple of years ago. That's actually in my freezer right now. Speaking of, the weird collection of bodies, I always like to hear what's in people's freezers.
Oh, I've got a good story for you there.
Oh, good. I love this.
Because
I think that this is actually about preservation as well. And there's just a little bit of his hair beneath this button. And I sometimes pick it up and I think about him with this little bit, this little bob. And I think that there's just so little that we have to cling to of what we've lost, beyond our emotional resonance with it. And in that we collect in the freezer. I have several weird specimens, and I've had actually quite a few conversations about what finds its way into people's freezers, I think in an attempt to delay putrefaction and death.
Yeah, there's an interesting idea for a book. What's in people's freezers?
Oh yeah, and the cat I meant to bury. He died in the winter, and I've really meant to get around to it and haven't. And so he lives there now.
Yep. Yeah, I get it. I had a dog die on Christmas Day a few years ago, and the ground was I've just broke shovel after shovel trying to get into the dirt. Give you a fun. Feel free to edit this out.
Here we are.
fun anecdote just of my past, which is that I have a very eccentric dad, and he was biking down like a country highway one time and found a dead fox that had been hit by a car very recently. And he said, "I know what my wife would like, a stuffed fox." So he straps it on the back of his bike, brings it home, and pops it in the freezer. And then, of course, like before, there are all these laws surrounding, a taxidermist won't stuff a fox unless it's been officially not killed in an illegal way. So we had to wait for state game warden to come and inspect our freezer fox. But that just meant that this thing sat in our freezer for a year. A big, very large fox. And there was never any food in my house. So whenever friends would come over, they'd dig through the cupboards, they look in the fridge, nothing, and then they go to the freezer. And there'd be a big plastic bag in there, and they'd dig in and, That was great. That was great.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I really appreciate that. I actually, I think the things that we collect in our freezer are telling. And I actually, one of the questions I have for you is there's a lot of collecting in this book. There's a lot of collecting of different things, collecting of mucus, collecting of urine. You got into we've talked a lot about phosphorus on this podcast, so you got to touch on that.
Yeah.
Collecting of blood and collecting of breath too. And I wondered what it is about collecting. Like hmm, there's a lot of different impetuses for collection in the book. Blood to give, to
Hmm.
share, mucus to study, um, and the breath bit was something else entirely. It was one of my favorite passages.
I'm glad to hear
Um,
that.
uh, and so, yeah, and I struggled to come up with a question. I thought a long time about it this morning, but there is something around collecting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think there are a lot of ways to take this. One, it's hard to let go, right?
Mm, mhm,
Um, I mean, you see this in just we were talking about even in like children who are retentive, right? Uh,
mhm.
and if we were, I don't totally buy all the Freudian stuff. Yeah,
Me
like
neither.
yeah, but these
But
are they're
but still.
they're little tokens of death. They are evidence of your own disintegration, literal
Mm,
disintegration. So I think part of what's caught up in there is this discomfort or interest in your own disintegration.
mhm.
I think part of it is what I really kind of like is the fascination. You have people are just curious about their own corpus, right?
Yeah.
And what's going on with it. My favorite, I think I actually ended up editing it out of the book, but one of my favorite anecdotes, this famous scientist who was kind of, um, I think of him as kind of like the inheritor of kind of Louis Pasteur's
Mm.
uh, mantle. This guy Mechnikov. He's the reason that we eat yogurt today. He was like obsessed with gut health. He's the person who like discovered macrophages in the human body.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so
Okay.
he got interested in this idea of these bacteria living within you, and kind of very kind of early microbiome stuff, and he really very literally kind of ushered the yogurt industry into existence. Before that, it was just like this kind of esoteric, largely Bulgarian thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and he got really into the idea that uh, transit time through the intestines was like an important marker of your health and a
Mhm.
determinant of how long you could live. And so
Sure.
as he's dying, he's all hopped up on laudanum. I guess
Mm.
hopped down technically, and
Mhm.
and he's there, and he's of course still obsessed with all this stuff. And he looks up and he sees one of his colleagues, this guy Salim Baini, and he kind of grabs the guy and he says, "Salim Baini, promise me you'll do the postmortem and you'll look in my intestines and see what it looks like in there." And still, even after death, he wants to know kind of what the transit time of his
Yeah.
feces is and what it's going to look like. So even when he's looking at not being able to take anything with him, leaving everything entirely, he's still interested in what exactly is going on inside of him.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. There's this idea of these materials can tell you a lot about yourself too. Your
Mhm.
hair is a marker of really a lot of the hormones that are circulating through your body, or
Absolutely.
urine is still an amazing diagnostic tool. We
Yeah.
don't think about it, but people have been peeing in cups for 5,000 years.
Long time.
Yeah. And then I think the other cool thing is just um, all the science that's been done with all of these saved things, right? As you know from phosphorus, probably, right?
Yeah.
This weird guy, Henning Brandt, boiling down his urine forever and ever.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh,
Get a white powder, Hamburg.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and there's, yeah, so many things in that territory of like all the science we've learned from our own bodies.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there's a lot of different places to go with this, but I think that, I mean, it's funny to be a bit of a mystery to yourself, right? That we're in these meat suits, these leaky meat suits that we're inside of, and yet we can't see inside of. And I think, I'll say that I've spent a lot of my career doing field harvests for people and walking them through internal biology. And one of my favorite things about it, there are a lot of different things I like about it, but to get to see the inside of a body, even if it's not your own, is spectacular, and fascinating. And to look inside of stomachs and lungs and intestines, and to be closer to that piece, and seeing people's response to that is fascinating, because I think there is a sort of enigma that exists inside of us, even though we are that thing.
Absolutely. I mean, who doesn't feel this, right? What is actually going on in there? You know, you have an
Yeah.
upset stomach or some kind of niggling pain or nothing at all. You just, who knows? But everything is
Yeah.
somehow somehow working, and the only real evidence as a layperson that you have is what comes out.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. And I think, maybe this is a good space. There's a lot about self and other in the book, right? This sort of porous boundary between self and other, which I'm always interested in touching on, right? That even if we're just a tube encased in meat, we are populated by many, many others, and constantly taking others in and out. I'll read this piece back to you because I loved it. You say, a shift like this makes our ideas about evolution and about competition much more complicated. You don't just get bacteria from your parents, after all. You mainly acquire them from the environment, from that breath of air you just took, from the banana you had for breakfast, from the guy at the deli who made your hoagie. If you're continuously selecting and feeding and manipulating a phalanx of additional genetic material from your surroundings, oh, I'm so sorry. My cursor just moved.
Oh, that's okay. Don't worry.
I'm so sorry about that. Here I was
That's
doing
good.
an
It gives me a
okay
second to
job.
think.
Great. If you're continuously selecting and feeding and manipulating a phalanx of additional genetic material from your surroundings, that means you're a lot less you than we usually think. You would be constantly giving pieces of yourself away and receiving pieces of others. Life, both as moment to moment survival and as the long evolutionary arc, would be much more collaborative and entangled than we currently think of it. I was struck at how entangled we become in our effluvia, which we can kind of get into, but also that there was a relationship between self and other from the holobiont and our microbiome, but also as one person's blood becomes another. And so it was both with outside world and our inside world and with each other.
Yeah, yeah. So, boy, I've got a lot of thoughts related to that one. Yeah, there's one of the things I think we really neglect, and maybe even very artfully neglect, is that inherent in our own bodies and what they shed, there's a kind of social contract, right? Um, there's this idea out there, I think maybe especially prevalent in the United States, this kind of uh, frontiers person, libertarian idea of like, I'll just go do it all on my own, right? I'm gonna
Rugged
go off.
individualism.
Yeah, rugged individualism. I'll be off there just doing it. Um, which I think there are things to be said for that point of view, but it is, if you look at the biology of the human body, absurd, right? And
Absolutely.
we saw this during the pandemic, right? That we are just innately, irrevocably intertwined by all this stuff. And part of existing on this planet is dealing with other people's effluvia and being thoughtful about our own.
Mhm.
It sounds silly, but it is just, from the very get-go of human civilization, this has been the thing. We think of human civilization as like, oh, writing and music and poetry and theater and all these things. But if you go back to ancient Sumer, the biggest takeaway is like, oh my God, these people had bathrooms. Right? These are the first attempts at sewage control. If you look in Deuteronomy, yes, there are things about don't be covetous of your neighbor's wife, but there's instructions in Deuteronomy for, if you need to take a crap, go outside the camp and dig a hole that's at least 6 inches deep, or God will be angry at you.
Hide it from God. I
Yeah,
read that this morning.
yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, this is part of what it means to live on this planet, is dealing with what comes out of you, and really being thoughtful about it and understanding what exactly, I don't know, just you have an obligation to other people. That is part of life. You can't just do it on your own, no matter what you try.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and not just, I don't know, not just an obligation. I think I often think about how ecologically there is a sense of flow of matter between many different things. I mean, even the act of eating is a flow of matter, that eventually is the soil that you eventually go back to, adding phosphorus and nitrogen and potassium. But the effluvia is a flow of matter between us in many ways. And we've talked a lot about sewage systems on this podcast because I'm fascinated by them, and how we determine, first of all, whether anything is waste or not. Waste is a bit of a misnomer in many ways for something that is a part of that cycle, from an ecological standpoint. But the way that we share our microbiomes, the way that we transfer germs, the way that our effluvia, our fecal matter, our vomit, transfer disease, but also, and I was just delighted in the chapter about blood, in the way that we might share and sort of revive. And you recount this, you're a blood giver, a frequent blood donator, and you have this beautiful recounting of watching the Addams Family, and giving blood. And you talk about that first act of giving blood a long time ago, that there would have been this anastomosis, that there would have been this direct connection between you and the person that your blood was reinnervating, and now that's layered away, and you contrast it really beautifully. This giving act that defies so much of the story I think we've told ourselves about individualism, about ruggedness. That there's this. I think you call it a sort of socialist act. Um, those who need receive. And then contrasting that with the reality, which is that this has been commoditized, in a pretty profound way. I know that I think plasma is the 13th most widely traded commodity in the world.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. It makes a lot of sense, though.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, I don't get into the exact figures, but one of the things that most people don't realize is that along with, our country's massive arsenal of weaponry and various kind of machinery of war, we also have these ships just floating all over the place with plasma waiting on them in case anybody needs it, which is kind of amazing. Better that than whatever else could be on that ship, probably. But I mean, I love the anecdote that you brought up. When I read that, I just remember being so blown away. I had never heard about this. This was the idea. What's now called in that field the blood on the hoof era, because you would have to actually get on a horse and ride down to wherever somebody needed blood. And yet for a time you would actually have your veins sewn onto the other person's, and you would momentarily share this circulatory system. And the one specific anecdote of this French doctor who performed this on a father and child, this child who had was kind of basically, to all appearances, dead, right? And they sew the veins together, and the father's blood starts passing through the child, and the child immediately takes on color and sits up and starts laughing. It's just unbelievable, and you just never, when you give blood, it's such a it's still, I think, a beautiful and amazing and even sometimes very funny act. but you do miss out on actually seeing what's going on.
Yeah.
That the stuff that's inside you can just revive someone else.
Yeah.
This really, and I always use the word miraculous very carefully, but I can't think of anything else more miraculous than that. Such a just beautiful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredible. And I think, as you were saying that too, I was thinking about fecal transplants are certainly on the rise
Yeah.
and
I
and
tried to
and an
do one actually for
interesting.
this book to be a
Did you
donor.
really?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, well, yes, I'd reached out to an organization that did this and was kind of on the docket, and then they accidentally killed someone. I mean, not
Oh,
totally their fault, but it's a dangerous thing, right? Because you are
yep.
uh, often folks who receive a fecal transplant are in kind of like dire intestinal straits.
Quite.
Um, sometimes it's used to combat something like antibiotic resistant C.
Mhm.
difficile or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, they had a patient who was really kind of at the edge of things pass away,
Mm.
and that was the end of that.
Mm.
But I'm still a fascinated by that whole process, and it is amazing when you see a lot of the stuff that happens where it's like a person just entirely revivified.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I mean,
it's
I
very
think in a
nuts.
similar way to blood,
Absolutely.
and not what we think about, and I mean that can be given and shared, I think, through modern technology, even if it's the what did you call it, on the hoof era?
Yeah, yeah,
Even if it's not all that modern, I think is an incredible capacity for our affiliative biology.
yeah, yeah. Well, so let's bring it back to mucus because you quoted a little bit of that mucus chapter.
Mhm. Let's talk about
Um,
mucus. The
yeah,
mucus chapter was enchanting.
isn't that so
Mm.
cool and weird? I mean, it just
Oh,
still blows my mind.
me too. I hadn't thought about mucus all that much. I mean, to some
No,
degree, but not to this degree.
I mean, just so many things in there. It that one maybe more than any other was the one that I kind of you know uh, I just thought, okay, this is one of the things I need to cover. I'll go and check it out. And it turns out, no, it's this maybe the most to me of all these materials, the one that's kind of most fundamentally gets at what I'm trying to say. That we
Mm.
kind of uh, whether we accept it or not, we all kind of inhabit this one single massive body that's always circulating different stuff between us, right? So to kind of get into a little bit deeper about mucus, it I thought of it going in probably as you did or most people. It's just like this filter, right? You have it in your nose or something. You
Mhm.
take a breath, and anything that's in the air gets kind of stuck in it and flushed out. Um, which turns out to just be so far off base. Yes, it does do that. But far more important is the other thing it does, which is keep stuff in. It captures bacteria um, and feeds them. That's
Yeah.
all. It's just crazy. One of the scientists, I went and visited MIT's mucus lab,
Mhm. The
which
biogel
is
lab.
an amazing place. Yeah. And I
I
think,
want to go to there.
oh, you should. You should. It's not too far from you.
It's
And it's
not.
also, at least when I was there, it was the only woman run lab at MIT, which is just mind boggling.
Interesting.
Um, and really cool then because, as you can imagine, um, it then also draws a lot of female grad students. It's just like a very, very cool atmosphere there. And they're doing just amazing work. But so one of the things they're showing is that mucus is basically, if you think about it, a single strand of mucin is like a piece of spaghetti or something covered in dust. Like it's this long protein backbone and has all
Mm.
these little tiny, um, this kind of like sugar sticking off the side, little sequences of sugars, kind of like hairs or something. Not a hair, but you get the idea.
Mhm.
And so I remember one of the grad students there describing it to me basically as kind of like a feeding trough in a farmyard or something, right? Where it has all these sugars are potential food for bacteria.
Mhm.
And we don't exactly know how, but somehow they feed all these bacteria in a way that helps them get along, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to feed this bacteria first, and once that bacteria eats off this single sugar, and then that exposes the next sugar, which another bacteria can then eat. So they're forced into this cooperative behavior, and these are things which are so virulent outside of this situation.
Yeah, I was going to say too, just to add to this, because this really stuck out to me, that the mucus itself suppresses the more virulent qualities of some of these bacteria. I think you mentioned S. aureus and the Staphylococcus aureus in the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, I mean, this is our staph is like, we all know staph infections probably. They are one of the top killers in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's something that if you stick it in a petri dish with another bacteria, it will do some of the most horrific things to that other bacteria as a defensive mechanism. And yet somehow a lot of us just have it in our bodies, and it's totally fine because mucus is controlling it and turning it into a beneficial member of the cohort, basically. And yeah, this just really blew my mind, this idea. I knew about the microbiome and this kind of huge coterie of thousands of species of bacteria that helps do all these important things for our bodies. It helps metabolize stuff. It when you think about the scent of a person, that's actually the scent of their bacteria you're smelling. All these really kind of fascinating things bacteria does, but I never had thought where they grow. When you're talking about a fecal transplant, for instance, what you're really talking about there is a mucus transplant, just from a different part of the microbiome. So yeah, it's mind-boggling. With that quote that you brought up, it gets back to this idea of just how tied together we are, right? If every time you touch somebody, you're getting all these bacteria from them, everything you eat, an apple core, I can't remember how much an apple has in it, but just all these species of bacteria in there. Some we still have never even realized, they're just now starting to genetically sequence the bacteria in the microbiome. Before it was just, stick it in a dish of agar gel and see what grows. But a lot of the stuff won't grow there, so you'd only get like a few species. And now they're realizing, oh my goodness, this thing has more DNA than our own bodies. It has more cells than our own bodies. So really cool stuff.
I was struck. I too. I mean, the microbiome is certainly something that I think is increasingly more discussed, though I think still scarcely understood. But this, I don't even know what to call it. This intermediary, this space between us and the microbiome that is mucus. Absolutely, I had no idea, and just how instrumental it is, how little we know. And I think you compare it at one point to soil. And I feel that too is a black box, right? It doesn't really grow outside of a lot of the soil food web can't exist in a vacuum, in isolation, in a petri dish. It needs to be in that medium. And so I think that adds some to, I think, both the mystery and I think the largesse of the interactions that are happening inside of our body that are so deeply interdependent upon one another and upon something like mucus. I think you say that according to the NIH, 80% of internal infections are mucosal dysfunctions. And so how little we understand this thing and it lines the tube, and then all the other bits too.
I mean, you realize how important this stuff is just when you realize we make like a gallon of it a day in our bodies. What a huge amount of I mean, when you hear these figures, like we make a gallon a day, it's responsible for 80% or related to 80% of internal dysfunctions. What's amazing to me when I hear that is just, why isn't it getting as much funding as we have? All the research into it,
I agree.
Because, I mean, it's this amazing stuff. It's in your eyes, it's in your nose, it's in your digestive tract, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and the vaginal secretions too, which you didn't bring into this, are all mucosal as well.
Yeah, the spinability of cervical mucus is one of these amazing predictors of whether or not someone will have a miscarriage.
Hmm.
And that kind of thing applies throughout. You can tell all different kinds of stuff about people from their mucus. And I
Yeah.
shouldn't even talk about it monolithically, because there are, I think, more than 20 and still counting different varieties of mucus that your body makes,
Sure.
Some specifically, they'll allow a bacteria to attach to them, and then they'll detach and just carry a harmful bacteria away if it's starting to show virulent traits. So yeah, it is just this huge, fascinating world.
And I just want to add to this before we move on. You donate some of your
I do,
mucus.
yeah. Who knows what's happened to it now? What's been learned?
Yeah. I mean, the collection of mucus was incredible. How many pig stomachs it took to just
Oh
garner
man,
enough to study, and then to be in that donation room looking at pictures of pickles,
yeah.
and having your mucus taken for scientific research.
It is, it is a hilarious setup, and it's just so funny to think, it's MIT, these are some of the smartest people in the world, and they're coming to work each morning and sitting down, and it's basically just like a breast pump that they have, that they stick the tube under their tongues, the mucosal gland there, and they're
Mhm.
spending an hour doing their work while having their mucus drained off. And to
I
get to
love
be
it.
part of that, yeah, it was very delightful and beautiful. And it is just so cool when you see, you know, anybody who's listening, and you yourself should go check it out, just these magnified images of mucus. They really are
Mm.
these beautiful, elegant images.
Mhm.
It looks almost like an interstellar nebula or something, these
Mhm.
long strands and hollows, and very, very beautiful stuff. And I think, as I
Mm.
mentioned in there, when the kind of head of the lab there, this guy, Brad Turner, showed me, after processing all this human mucus, all these pig stomachs, all this stuff, and you scrape it out and you purify it and you put it through a centrifuge and all this stuff. And at the end, from all this material, you end up with like a little tiny baggie of this, what looks like, cotton candy, except that it's worth $20,000 because of all the work to get it.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. I can't tell you what a delight every chapter was, but that really captivated me, and was something I really did not know. I mean, as much as I'd love to go through everything, I want to pause. I think I have to pause at breath, and I think I have to read this. I have to read this back to you, um, because I think the interesting thing that you just said there and that we were talking about is that so much of this really defies collection, even with, and in any appreciable amount, even with all the technology that we have to offer. Um, I don't know if I have a question here. I think I'd just be remiss if I didn't tell you how beautiful this chapter about collecting breath was. This manual for taking a collection of a last breath that I think is really what it means to be with the dying and with death in a way that is, I think, quite foreign and uncomfortable to us. Maybe another thing that we don't talk about, that is an inevitability to be with someone as they die.
Hmm.
If that's okay, if
Absolutely,
we
yeah,
can go there.
yeah.
Yeah. I wanna read this. You're talking about this manual for collection of the last breath, and it's just this piece, and I loved it so much. You say, during periods of consciousness, the collectee may also experience mental anguish as the very preciousness of life begins to preclude its enjoyment. The respiratory rhythm may be interrupted by weeping. In these circumstances, the collector should recount humorous anecdotes, the time they were trapped together in a canoe during a thunderstorm. Special care should be taken to avoid stories that mention estranged relatives, ripe fruits, cool breezes, or the stifled giggles of children hiding beneath blankets. Reading aloud is recommended, though never an overly dense or serious work. Charlotte's Web works well, but one must be careful not to make it to the end of the fair. I think in it too, you talk about holding hands and the manner and the firmness. that one might take a hand to cross the street.
Hmm.
Um, and I just thought it was it stood apart a little bit in the way that you wrote it. And I thought it was one of the most beautiful chapters of a book I've read in a long time.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so I think of it as being the weirdest chapter in a book full of weird chapters. Um, it's the one maybe a lot of the other stuff could kind of fall more in the direction of your classic book of nonfiction, right? Going to a mucus lab and seeing what you can learn there. But I was interested with this one, I think the kind of, with all of these, often there were just like a few little details that kind of sparkled in my mind or something, and I couldn't really get past and kind of dictated the structure of the chapter. And with this one, it was this idea. I learned that when, after Henry Ford had died and they were kind of inventorying all this stuff, they found this little test tube that said "the last breath of Thomas Edison." Um, and you think a lot about the last breath. You hear about people's last breaths and things like that. But this idea of trying to capture it and save it, it is same impetus as hair, but with like one of the most impossible things you could ever hold on to. It's a nice idea, but there's nothing left in that test tube of Thomas Edison's
No.
breath. It's all osmosed through the glass or through the cap.
Yes. And to determine even that last breath to begin with.
Yes, exactly. And to figure out exactly when it's happening. And yes, I kind of became very obsessed with just what that would be like, what that is like, to be with somebody through the end of their life, and to kind of, what is the breath? What does it mean? Why is it so important? For years and years, up until actually 1984, I think. Breathing and heart rate were the determinants of whether or not somebody was still alive. And yeah, so it's kind of got this, breathing has this, it's a beautiful act. It's probably the act that ties us most to other people. As I mentioned there, I think you take in so many molecules with every breath, and they all circulate this kind of mind-boggling amount, in fact, that you can be certain, like right now in our lungs, in my lungs, in your lungs, in the lungs of whoever else might be listening, there's a molecule in there of Abraham Lincoln's last breath, or of Julius Caesar's last breath, anybody. So it's this thing that is so, it just ties us all together in a way that's hard to wrap your mind around, just absolutely mind-boggling. And so the idea of trying to capture a person's last breath, what would make it unique to them, what that process would look like, just really caught me.
Yeah, I mean, it caught me. It caught me as well. It stood out. I don't know if it stood out in a weird way, or I think, one thing that comes up a lot on the podcast is, I think, in our looking to avoid and sometimes defy death, and the way in which we've hidden and obfuscated death from ourselves. I mean, even it was a great episode about undertaking dead and what's legal around caring for bodies, which we've done for many millennia up until actually Lincoln, who features a lot in the book, took a tour as an embalmed body, and it became quite in vogue, and that really set off the funerary industrial complex, which is a rabbit hole that might interest you.
Definitely
Um,
will. I'm going to go check that one out. I haven't
and
caught that
so
one.
I had somebody come on, Heidi Boucher, who works with people who want to continue to care for the bodies of their loved ones post-death, and to navigate that legally and practically, both. And I think that think that death connects us to one another too. That this is very much a part of life, and that this is a very big part of loving and caring and tending for one another.
Hmm.
And so I don't know, the tenderness with which you approached that and gave us a peek into a very vulnerable experience, I think that usually happens behind closed doors and then isn't talked about, was quite the gift.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, yeah, these are, I think, for me, the interesting thing about this entire project. As you've noted, like I'm always interested in death. And I'm also interested in the things we kind of tend to try to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I liked about this project is just it's I think an angle that a lot of people don't think of into to talking about these issues, right? Death is this
Yeah.
what we often think of as this kind of big ephemeral idea.
Yeah.
But it's really not, and it doesn't have to be. It is probably the least ephemeral idea. It's like the most corporeal.
Yeah, very corporeal.
Yeah, as I bring up kind of in the epilogue to the book, like at the end of the day, your own body is one of these effluvia. It's not one that you have to deal with. But somebody's going to, as you're just saying, somebody's going to have to deal with this thing. It's going to be something else to be disposed of. And then what? Then what?
And then what?
Yeah. Then it's, what lasts? It's, in my opinion, conversations like this one, right? This is what we're left with. The little tidbits of phrases and songs and words that somebody else might repeat in 5 years or 10 years or 100 years. So,
I mean,
yeah, it's sobering.
I think I don't know. Oddly enough, I've always taken a lot of comfort in the idea that I then disintegrate and go back into the grand cycle of things. And I mean that in a very practical manner, not a religious one, but that my whatever I've played host to goes back to that. I'm just sort of I think of it as a borrowed collection of atoms, right? As if I have borrowed these from some cosmic library, and they have a due date at which they will return so that they can become the composition of other things. And somehow I find that a little bit soothing.
That's, just to
Go ahead.
To add my own layer onto that metaphor. And that's how I think of all these materials we shed. They're just like little interest payments on a principle which will eventually come due, which I think is part of what makes them so disconcerting. It's like, oh yes, that hair's not coming back. Yeah.
I have that here because I loved this. You say, the reader by now will have realized that this is a book about death. It comes as a surprise to me as well, though I suppose it shouldn't be entirely unexpected. Every movement of the bladder or the bowels, every period, every fallen eyelash, every exhalation is a literal disintegration. Little by little, we are falling apart. This is part of the discomfort with discussing our bodily materials, isn't it? Each turd, each tear is merely an interest payment on a principle that must eventually come due.
There you go.
Yeah, I loved that. And I mean, and I wasn't thinking of it here, but I love this, that you do, well, it doesn't have its own chapter. There's an effluent, an emission that you talk about at the end, which is sound. I actually just recorded a whole podcast about sound and how we perceive it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but think about that as I read this, because what we do leave behind is this. We leave our conversations and our words, this sort of this thing that we can't define in evolution, right? Like where sound develops, where story develops. But this is truly what is lasting, and I think to me that spoke to what is lasting is connection and our attempt, however, some better than others, to define that connection, to explain it, to give it words, to give it sound.
Yeah, I think I never intended to end this book with by talking about sound. It just hadn't even really been on my radar. But when you think about it, it really is. It's another quote unquote waste material, right? I think because we have imbued it now with so much meaning, we fail to see it that way. But certainly, evolutionarily, initially these were just byproducts, right? An energetic byproduct of these sound waves passing out into the ocean or out into the air. And only slowly did we develop the organs and the capacity to capture them, make sense of them, and then it's kind of wild, this development of ears and sound producing organs, eventually until we get to us and we have this kind of fully formed language. And I find it just, very deeply inspiring and humbling thinking of sound that way, as this thing which has almost seemingly of its own accord come into existence, where now we have the capacity. We don't think of it in the same terms, we would never think of like someone singing Ave Maria or something in the same terms as someone shedding a tear or combing their hair, but they're similar, except that we have made something spectacular happen with this one, that I think it is the one that most defies death. And like exactly what you're saying, this ability to communicate and to pass something lasting and really kind of not fully indestructible, but as close as we know how to pass that along to somebody else, I think is just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was stunning. And I think it tied too into, you say at the beginning, right? The stories that we're not sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And for that to be the medium for the stories that I think we can share. And I think the idea of collaboration and connection that we can share in the face of something that would have it be more ruggedly individual, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially for me, part of my inspiration for this whole project was just becoming a new father, and suddenly just a wash in somebody else's, in urine and feces and so many tears, just like
Tears,
my shoulder was just
vomit,
continuously wet with
milk.
tears. And finding myself obsessed with, I would never in a million years have guessed this of myself, but I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I would just have to go into my daughter's room and listen to her breathing.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. And yeah, so then you start to develop this for me a much broader sense of like, what is my point? What is the point of all of this? And so sound and language and this idea of, maybe there is something, more than just this genetic material which will get immediately diluted, or belongings. What are they? All that stuff. But the idea of being able to pass along a cadence, some kind of essential bit of knowledge or something like that, even a turn of phrase, I'll take it. Might not be much,
Colloquialism.
but something, to have something that lasts and goes on out there and feels like a little bit of piece of yourself. That's
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah. It's profound. And I think that one of the things that captured me throughout, that not in every effluent, was that people were trying to connect. maybe in unexpected ways, whether it was a no-fap Reddit thread, but there was this deep attempt in many ways, right? Like avoiding connection while simultaneously creating this connection through the ether with other Redditors, or
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know, the ayahuasca journey and connecting through vomiting, and so we have this connection through semen or lack thereof, and then of vomiting and crying too, right? That these were all places where, in very different ways, there either was a lack of connection and a trying to find it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, just to give a little more background on, you brought up the chapter on semen and nofap.
Yeah,
There's
it was
this
great.
massive online community, right? Close to like 1 million people devoted to this idea on Reddit of that their lives might be improved by just not masturbating. And it is. I find it a little funny, I admit. But
Yeah.
it's very neat in that, you have these guys and they have these kind of very entertaining handles like monk mode or something, right? And attached to each of them is a number that shows you how many days it's been since they last masturbated.
Mhm.
And they're just working like hell at this, trying not to masturbate and often failing. They're wearing jock straps around the house and getting aroused by accidentally rubbing up against a kitchen counter. But even in the midst of this, you're right, they're still seeking human connection.
Yeah,
They're there on
deeply.
this subreddit, talking to other subredditors, and developing, a very robust community there.
Yeah.
And oftentimes a very thoughtful and supportive one. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
It is something else.
I'm gonna read a little
Sure,
piece
sure, go
because
for it.
I love the way that user always 122 said something about their fellow Redditors on the r/nofap sub during that conversation as the chat was being torn apart by centrifugal forces seemingly beyond its control. "We are a lost people," said user always 122. "When I first witnessed the threat unfolding, I thought they were lost too. They'd left behind many of those daily interactions with the physical world, school, work, recreation that had previously moored people to the flesh and blood fact of other human beings. And in place of those interactions, they had entrusted themselves to a net of emojis and videos and algorithms. I still think they're a lost people. Now I just don't know who isn't, or if that's a bad thing." And I think
Yeah.
that, we said this earlier, we live in a time of disconnection,
Hmm.
from our own corporeality, but also from one another, and this really drove that point home to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is, who knows what the future holds in that respect. Um,
Yeah,
but it'll be something undoubtedly strange and interesting.
yeah.
You didn't mention this one, but one of my favorite examples from the book, just about kind of the strange ways that people make connections, actually comes from the flatulence chapter, which is kind of like a very ethnographical approach to talking about this game that I grew up playing. I'm embarrassed to admit, growing up in Pennsylvania, a game called Doorknob, often played by teen boys. And apparently, I had no idea until I started researching this. It's been played by teen boys for maybe hundreds of years in Pennsylvania. Um,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
yep,
The
okay.
the base, and it's a very mature game where, if you fart, anybody else can call doorknob on you, and if you do not make it to a doorknob, they are allowed to punch you until you get there. Um, so put that aside for 1 second.
Mhm.
You have flatulence, which is this, everybody knows what it is. But what's fascinating to me is, kids are brought up to, first they often think it's funny, a child just farting in the bathtub thinks this is the most amazing thing in the world. Then they learn, oh no, this is something, there are social restrictions around where I do this. I can do it here, not there. It's probably not a good idea to do it in school. I'll get made fun of, all this stuff. But then something, I think, it's gross and it's silly, but I think it's also very beautiful. Something happens usually around the teen years when teens are starting to kind of construct their own hierarchies and their own social world outside of the home. Or flatulence, which has then been, up to that point, been so taboo, now suddenly becomes this currency, gains this cultural currency as a way to establish their own world, right? It's like, okay, these are my friends. This is what we're doing here. We're going to fart whenever we want to. We're going to establish our own rules for it, but this is going to be one of the ways that we actually get along with each other. And this is, they play this weird game in Pennsylvania, but it's happening across the country, probably across the world, right? That people are using this as and particularly often tends to be teen boys, using this as like a way of getting along. And to me, very beautiful. Obviously, people are farting all the time, and then, it gets subsumed into the relationships they have later in life. And my favorite anecdote from that entire chapter, this writer, Primo Levi, very famous writer, provided one of the most, I think, most important accounts of living in Auschwitz, as well as just beautiful writing about chemistry. He was a chemist. He has these recollections of his aunt and uncle, very, very old, sitting in this Italian piazza and having these arguments about whether the husband should be farting and how he has to make sure that he taps his cane whenever he farts so people can't hear, and just the way that farting remains really woven into the tapestry of love, in a very essential way. And I think all because of this kind of weird social role it plays as people grow up.
Yeah, I mean, in the teen boy section, I was struck by you saying, that transition from young childhood amusement into the social mores and the suppression of that, into this sort of almost rebellious space that is being carved out. Maybe it's not happening around girls, maybe it's not happening around family, but it becomes this bastion of social connection.
Absolutely.
That, I mean, I think I'd ask in many ways, do you think that there's a different story for us to tell about our bodies in which this becomes more of, because it is so inevitable, because farting is so much a part of love and a part of our interactions or lack thereof, or the way that we dance around one another? I don't know, as you wrote this, did you imagine maybe a different way of how we approach this story around our messy, leaky, disintegrating bodies?
I mean, yes and no. I think we should do a lot more to acknowledge the reality of what comes out of us, right? We're making life harder all the time. I mean, just continuously, by pretending these things don't exist. I think one of there are been a lot of progress in this area, I think. At the same time, I think these things, one of the things I love about them is that it's an impossible nut to crack. These things are always going to be out of our control. And because of that, they're always going to be funny,
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, only when we relinquish control or acknowledge that we have none will these things stop being funny. And I almost actually prefer them funny.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
When to kind of take it back to that ayahuasca experience where I decided, okay, this is this drug that makes you kind of do the most intense vomiting that anybody's ever done in their entire life. This almost spiritual vomiting.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, if I'm going to write a chapter about vomit, I need to experience this horrific
Your
vomiting.
wife in this was it was very funny.
My wife is just a supremely reasonable person and asked a question I should have taken to heart much more. Just, what are you expecting to get out of this exactly? People usually come to ayahuasca because they've had this serious trauma and they have something they need to expel, which I did not have. And I also, it turns out, I should have also listened to my doctor, who had told me years before I seemed to lack a vomiting reflex or have a very weak vomiting reflex. So that I ended up going to signing up to be part of an ayahuasca cult, not realizing really how culty it was, thinking this was like a cover to do a drug, and really, no, these were very serious religious people dressed in white gowns and chanting music, and just had the most miserable experience of my life, experiencing, taking a drug that makes you experience the most intense pain and nausea, and being unable to find any relief in it because I could not physically vomit. And yeah, it was terrible. But also, again, it brought back that human connection, because this place was full of people who were there for really good, legitimate reasons.
Yes.
There's a guy there who I just really fell in love with, who, he was a veteran of the Korean War, had such bad PTSD, he couldn't even dial his phone. Or, a woman who I ended up, having this very intense friendship with, just because of the intense pain we were going through, who's 18 and has already tried to commit suicide so many times she can't even count them. And it was either this or going and getting brain surgery. So she chose this.
Yeah.
So painful, at least, looking at my own experience, is very comical because it was so stupid. But it ends up in the end also, I came out of there with these relationships, which were unbelievably close, considering how little time I spent there. I was only there for like 17 hours before they had to take me out on a stretcher. So it was also ended up being this very kind of beautiful experience in its own way.
Yeah.
If you can have a beautiful experience in a porta potty in Orlando.
It was pouring sweat.
Yes, my own little private
Mortally
sweat lodge.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I wondered too, and I'll bring this piece up too with the tears and the tennis player whose name you're gonna have to pronounce,
Marin Cilic.
Chilich. Okay,
Yeah.
Chilich. There it is. I wonder too, part of the ayahuasca thing is this sort of normalization of vomiting, of shitting yourself during this process that you're doing together. I mean, it's a group project, and that the opening of that vulnerability may be making those connections deeper in some ways, right? These things that are so closeted, and even thinking about the scene with tennis and how much we even closet our tears, right? That we just hide all of these vulnerable aspects, and if deeper connection is possible through them and through that reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, and I use the word growth with like the biggest possible air quotes here. Yeah,
I
and I
appreciate
think
that.
even personal growth, right? So to me, the biggest material I wish we could change our relationship with would be tears. Simply because obviously it's an issue a lot of men have a problem with, difficulty expressing them. One of the anecdotes I bring up is I've got a friend who's just, your classic gruff dude, part outdoorsman, part lawyer, but, very affectless. And when his child was born, he like felt this upwelling of emotion. He's there in the living room, felt this upwelling emotion, and instead of being able to express it through tears, he just passed out and thus missed one of the most important moments of his life, probably, right? And yet, tears, obviously, we think of them as being this sign of weakness. A lot of people do. Not me. My biggest realization in this, there's a philosopher, Martha Nussbaum, who has a lot of amazing writing about this. There's lots of philosophers who have struggled with this for years, I mean, by years, I mean millennia and millennia of tears seem to kind of run counter to philosophy because there's this thing which seems to show that your brain is not reasoning correctly. It's like it's a whole entirely different brain state. Really, your brain is functioning completely differently. But importantly, too, all these philosophers who have kind of disavowed tears only do so having glimpse this kind of eternal order by crying, right?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I just think tears, to me, the way I regard them now, they are kind of like the punctuation mark toward these stories that we tell. It's the end of a chapter or something which demarcates, this was important. This was real. This thing happened. This thing was important to me.
Mm.
Which I think often
Mm.
gets denied because people are afraid of vulnerability, afraid
Yeah.
to say, oh, here's another person who's important to me. Their passing is affecting me. Or the loss of them in any of the ways that we lose people, them just moving to a different state.
Mhm.
So yeah, I wish folks would cry a lot more just
Mm.
because it helps to make sense of your life, and it
It
helps
does.
to show you, yes, I agree with Seneca, who's this famous philosopher who says, yes, we're all going to go back to, we'll be dissolved into atoms and your energy is going to get returned to whatever. But yeah, along the way, you should be noting the people who are important to you and what you loved and cared about. And that's what tears are
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I really love that. I'm a crier.
No, me
And
too. I'm a
certainly,
terrible one.
yeah,
I
I'm a
just
big
saw the
crier.
new Lilo and Stitch, which I didn't actually love, but it didn't mean that I didn't like cry just throughout it. She's gonna
Uh-huh.
lose her little sister. No.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it's a beautiful thing, and not one for, and I'm curious if this remains true as we learn more about the world. In some ways, I hope it doesn't stay true, but it is interesting because humans are the only emotional criers that we're
Yes.
aware of. Human exceptionalism is something I always like to break down as much as possible,
Yes.
but
I
it
know.
is one space that has yet to be shown to be, rivaled in the animal kingdom, and
And no
I
one
think
knows
it's a
why.
social. Yeah, and it's a social bond, and you talk about in early Mesopotamia having sort of spring grieving
Yeah.
parties in which
Yeah.
to let the tears create fertility within the soil,
Yeah.
and
So
it is.
peculiar,
Our
isn't it?
grief, yes and no. I mean, I think our
Yeah.
grief, our sadness is fertile ground. We need it in to experience the aliveness, right? It is perigee and apogee. It is,
Mm-hmm.
it is I think William Blake called it the silken twine, that it is the breadth of our experience. And I think to make space for that deepening allows for a widening as well, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes
Mm-hmm.
any sense.
I think so. Tears are complex. Nobody understands them. And that's maybe one of the other
Mhm.
big things, takeaways from this book, is that all this stuff, it's amazing how little we know.
Yeah.
Um, yes, humans are the only ones that make tears, but I think to join you in undermining human exceptionalism, lots of animals make these distress cries, right? Um,
Mm.
and they sound almost sonically identical to humans a lot of the time. It's not uncommon to hear a cat meowing and sometimes think it's a baby.
Yeah.
Um, and as best we know, they kind of develop out of this bond that exists specifically between a mother and a child often, right?
Yeah.
Of, the child cries and expresses discomfort and it helps to solicit nurturing from the other person. And so I think there's something really beautiful and uh, just so intimate in
Mhm.
crying with another person. It is basically putting you in that, returning you to that situation of child and mother, which I think is one of the most intimate and closest bonds possible. And the fact that we can recreate that with anybody simply by
Yeah.
crying and being consoled is just, yeah,
Yeah.
it's gorgeous.
It really is. It really is. Cutter, what have I missed that you might want to say?
Not
I mean, there's
much,
so
not
much.
much.
There's so much, and I just want to point people at the book. I mean, each chapter felt very different, which I appreciated too. I mean, there was a bit of a journey of prose as much as there was a journey through the body and of of different ways of conceiving of structure and cadence that I mean, I it was stunning. I don't even know what to say, but I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything.
I really think you did. Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words about the book. I'm glad to hear that, just because that was one of my goals, is to have every one of these chapters kind of you take the material and you see how the story of that material wants to be told. What is
Mm.
the most breathy way we can tell this story? What is the most uriny way we can tell this story? So I'm glad to hear that. I think you did an amazingly thorough job here. I guess the only thing I would say was just, this is less even about this book itself. It's just about the approach to it that I think for me was important, which is just, we are always, I guess it's that famous Joan Didion quote, we tell ourselves stories in order to live, right?
Yeah.
We're always telling ourselves stories and living these narratives. And this project for me, all my projects, but maybe especially this one, was really about realizing in every narrative something is getting elided or skipped over or covered up, right?
Yes.
And often, if you sit down and you look at it very closely, you'll see those little gaps or those little, spots of whiteout. And I just cannot emphasize how important I think it is for me, but probably for everybody, and just for living, to take a lot of time to go look at those spaces.
Yes.
This happened to be, the ones that often get covered up in regard to our body, but they're everywhere if you're looking for them. Mm-hmm. And I just cannot emphasize enough how important it is to slow down, pay attention to what you're maybe purposely skipping over, and examine it, a la Mechnikov and the autopsy. Make sure you're being thorough.
Want to see that transit time.
I know.
I appreciate that. That's, the stories we've chosen to tell ourselves and the ones that we have not, and being able to see those, which is hard, right? Because they're the white spots, they're the blank spaces.
Yes.
Has been a big theme on the podcast, and I don't think anybody has put words to it as beautifully as you just did.
Thank you.
But I think that exploration of what's the story here? I also sometimes I call this trying to figure out the shape of the box that we've put ourselves in, and to reimagine that entirely.
Yeah. Oh, you're doing a good job here on the podcast. I have to say that.
Thank you.
I was, just amazed at the cool conversations you've been having. And as I assume this is going to be something at this point you might edit out, I'll say that I love talking, but I often dread these conversations, just because a lot of times it isn't an actual conversation. So I really, you're doing awesome stuff. And I'm, one, amazed at the quality of the conversation, but two, I don't know how you're doing this so often. How are you doing this so often?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually just recently took a job, which I mean, I was doing a job, but I had more time for this, and I think I am doing this so often because it means that much to me.
It's obvious. I can tell. I am amazed and appreciate it.
Yeah, and I can't define that. I think that I think my hope is, just on a personal level, that in telling all of these stories, some of these blank spaces, right, that a bigger picture begins to emerge for anybody who might be listening, not to all, but to some of these threads that keep reappearing. And I think somehow those threads are also what tethers me to something I need to be tethered to.
Yeah. Maybe back to the body.
So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you coming in with conversation. I think that that's always what I'm looking for is to
It
be a
can be
little
hard
bit
to
more
get in these
casual.
situations.
Yeah, and it's such a funny thing, and I've thought a lot about this over 120 episodes, but I mean, it's a very cold, we don't know one another, and
Hmm.
so how to foster conversational chemistry from a cold space, a cold email is something I've considered more than I care to admit.
Well, you do a great job of it. Just
Oh, thank
even
you.
just like when I saw that you wanted to have the video on, I think that, yeah, it's amazing. It makes a difference. Not just
Oh,
having it be a
yeah.
voice out there in the ether.
Yeah.
Um, and when you can see somebody smiling, yeah, they're not
Yes.
out to get me. They're not out to get me.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's an intimidating thing on both sides. I tell everybody I'm still nervous every time I turn on the mic.
I get it.
Just
I get it.
incredibly so.
Yeah,
But it matters, and I think, gosh, sharing work like this, I mean, I just want everybody to read this. I
well, thank
and
you.
and
Me
so
too.
that's a piece too. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna get everybody to read this.
Cool.
Um,
Deal.
I I will be in touch. So next steps, I will be in touch with Sharon. I don't know when this is coming out precisely. My but I could put it, if there was a place you wanted it, I could probably put it wherever you wanted it with one or two exceptions.
I mean, probably
Um,
sooner the better. I know we've got an excerpt coming out
yeah.
in Discover magazine, I think next week.
Ooh, okay.
So kind of, having it around then would be awesome, but it's really, I'm
I
flexible.
think I could turn that around quite easily for next
Cool.
week.
Cool.
And so then it would just be promoted. I'd promote it on social media and all of those places, and send this to Sharon as well for you to
Awesome.
use however you wish. And if there's anything else I can do, please don't hesitate to ask. It would be my pleasure.
Great. Great. I was going to say, I enjoyed this conversation so much. I've got, from grad school and living in New York, a million author friends too. If you're amenable, I would send them your
Please,
way as well.
please, I would actually really appreciate that.
And obviously your
Um,
decision to completely reject them if you so choose.
Totally,
But
totally.
I
But
think
that
there are a lot of folks I know who would love conversations like this.
Okay, I would really appreciate that because I'm looking for those people. I send a lot of cold pitches to
Yeah, yeah.
publishers, and I get lucky sometimes. But I would love more organic ways of connecting, and that started to happen more, and that excites me.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about to me is, being led from one person to another. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I've said about this is each of these episodes has changed my life in small and rather profound ways, and that leads to the next guest, the next topic of exploration, especially since a lot of these are threaded together.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah,
Um, well, I will definitely highly recommend you to some of my friends.
perfect. Thank you. I mean, please do, and thank you for this book, and we'll get this out next week.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Kate. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. If what you found resonated with you, may I ask that you share it with your friends or leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts? This act of reciprocity helps others find Mind, Body, and Soil. If you're looking for more, you can find us at groundworkcollective.com and at Kate_Kavanaugh, that's KATE_KAVANAUGH on Instagram. I would like to give a very special thank you to China and Seth Kent of the band All Right, All Right for the clips from their beautiful song Over the Edge from their album The Crucible. You can find them at All Right, All Right on Instagram and wherever you listen to music.